Hello, and on the gaming table today, we're taking a look at something a bit different for Warmaster. I'm going to call this one a scenario generator, but it's almost more of a deployment generator. You'll see what I mean in a minute. This is based off another wargame called Volley Bayonet Road to Glory, which is a black powder Napoleonic style game. I've taken some rules from that game and adapted them for use in Warmaster. So let's take a look at how this works. Here's the battlefield that we'll be using for this playtest today, and you can see it's a fairly typical sort of Warmaster battlefield with plenty of cover and some elevation and other bits and pieces here. Nothing too fancy. The next thing we need to do is to get our forces. So here I'm going to use my Norse against my Dark Elves, and so I've picked two 2,000 point forces, and you can see the details here. To keep things simple, I didn't worry about magic items for this particular battle. The next thing to do is to split our forces into wings in kind of the pre-modern tradition. So each of the forces gets broken up into 4 wings: center, reserve, left, and right. The center has to be the largest, and then the other ones have to be between 50 and 100% of the points of the center, just using the regular Warmaster points. So here you can see the Dark Elf force, and this is what it looks like on the table. And then if we look at the Norse force here, again, it's broken up into the 4 wings. And once again, here's what it looks like on the table. Now that we have our forces in wings, each side will pick 2 cards from a deck of 26 cards. These cards are laid out with different options in terms of deployment and things like flank attacks or reserves. Here, these are the 2 Dark Elf cards. The Dark Elves have picked 2, and then they have to choose one of these to apply to their force. So this is the one they chose, a turning maneuver to the right. The Norse also picked 2 cards, and when they looked at them and thought about it, they decided to choose prepared defense. Notice that in this one, some of their forces will leave the table and will not return as a flank attack or as reserves. And now we start doing the deployment. In this case, the numbers are called out from 1 to 10, and when you see that number on one of your wings on your card, you have to deploy that in the appropriate deployment zone, either at center, left, or right, or in the reserve. If the numbers on the 2 different cards on each side are the same, then we roll off to see who goes first. Note that you don't get to see each other's deployment card, you're just relying on the other person to follow the instructions on their card for their deployment. So as we watch the finish of deployment here, basically the stages we've gone through is creating your army and dividing it into wings, then drawing 2 deployment cards and picking one of those that you're going to use, and then deploying according to that card. We now roll off to see who takes the first turn. In this case it's the Norse, and away we go. Now in the battle here, we're not following any other particular scenario rules. The kind of situation that faced most armies would be the 2 armies are meeting, it's the full force on display, and we're trying to defeat the enemy. So basically, that's just the rules of breaking the army as per regular Warmaster rules. So that's what we're doing in the battle. Here, the Dark Elves are just finishing up their first turn, and at the end of the first turn, we have to consult our deployment cards to see what happens to certain wings. On the different cards, some of the wings may disappear. In this case, 1 wing is disappearing from both the Norse side and the Dark Elf side. In the Norse case, it's not going to return. In the Dark Elf case, it's going to return as a flank attack. This is the information that's given on the card. So if we just look at what's happening in this particular battle, the Norse have pulled back to the village to defend it and their line of communications along the road, and the Dark Elves are moving up and getting ready to shoot with all of their crossbows. Let's see how this works out. So here the Norse got driven back a little bit and 1 unit is in confusion. Now it goes over to the Norse turn. They're having a bit of a think about what they should do. In the end, the Norse decide to pull back into a more defensible position, and that's filling with their mission because they're on a prepared defense. They're also a little bit worried about their flank, so they try and pull some units around to cover that in case the Dark Elves have a flank attack there. And yes, according to the card, that's what the Dark Elves have. And so they start to deploy their flank attack here, which is going to be threatening that relatively weak flank of the Norse. The other Dark Elf units start to move up into position. The Dark Elves try to engage with a charge on the right. However, it doesn't really come off. They fail the order, and so the best that they can do is a little bit of repositioning. And then the rest of the Dark Elf units move up into shooting range. And the shooting attacks go pretty well for the Dark Elves. They do quite a bit of damage, drive back a couple of Norse units, and a unit of Ulfirna on the extreme right of the picture, the Norse left flank, gets eliminated due to their exceptionally large drive back move. The Norse now decide that the best form of defense is attack, at least on their right flank towards the top of the picture, and so they send in some cavalry against the repeater crossbowmen. They manage to survive the standard shoot. And then some Huskarls and bondsmen go in as well to tackle the Dark Elf infantry over there. There'll be a big scrum of combat over there later on. The other Norse units don't get a lot of movement, and they don't manage to really reinforce their line too much here, with a couple of failed orders going on. But that takes us to combat. And in the combat, it takes a little while, but over 2 rounds of combat, the Norse do quite a bit of damage to the Dark Elf infantry there. And eventually, they have to fall back and try and cover their flanks, but they know they're about to get charged by the Cold One Knights over on that flank. For their next turn, the Dark Elves engage in some initiative moves early on. They send some Cold Ones in on both flanks with initiative charges, and they also reposition some of their Dark Riders with initiative evade movements. At the top of the screen, the Dark Elves also send some infantry in with initiative charge to support the Cold Ones at the top of the screen. Other Dark Elf units try to maneuver to get into charge positions, especially the Witch Elves. However, they manage to fail their order to charge, so they're not going in this turn, and the rest of the Dark Elf units just get ready to engage in shooting. The Dark Elf shooting is reasonably effective, with a couple of Norse stands removed and a couple of units confused. After that, we get into the melee combat. At the top of the screen, the Dark Elf Cold Ones and infantry break through the Huskarls and the bondsmen behind them, although it does take 2 rounds of combat, and eventually the Norse are driven back into the Harpies, which were dropped in behind the combat line. The Cold Ones then reposition and advance into the Norse cavalry up there, while the infantry fall back. The Cold Ones beat up that cavalry. After that, down at the bottom of the screen here, the Cold Ones beat up a unit of bondsmen, and eventually they fall back and get ready for a prospective countercharge. Now we come up to Norse turn 6. This is their last turn. They decide to countercharge with everything. They've got to try and push these Dark Elves back, do as much damage as they can, and maybe they can push the Dark Elves to their breakpoint. Based on their deployment card, the Norse also want to try and reclaim their line of communications at the road. If the Warmammoth and cavalry can beat up those Dark Riders enough, then they'll be able to reclaim those victory points. Things start out well for the Norse. They beat up a unit of Dark Riders and a unit of Harpies towards the middle of the field, and the Storm Giant manages to take out the War Hydra in 1 round of combat and then advances on from there. Unfortunately, it only manages a draw against a second unit of Harpies, so that's not going to help take the Dark Elves to their breakpoint. Then at the bottom of the screen, the Warmammoth and the cavalry don't quite manage to take out all of the Dark Riders, and now we're in a prime position to see a Dark Elf counterattack. The Dark Elves send in all of the units that are able to get into combat because now they want to try and break the Norse. They want to make sure that they're at least going to get a draw out of this game. So here, the combats generally go the Dark Elves' way. They don't have to fight the one at the bottom with the Warmammoth against the single stand of Dark Riders because they manage to take the Norse to the Norse breakpoint before they get to that combat. So this is going to be a good result for the Dark Elves overall. And so in the end result here, the Norse army is broken. They reach their breakpoint of 9. The Dark Elves weren't that far away. They were on 8.5 on a break of 10. So they were getting close. However, the Norse have definitely lost more points in victory points here, and so the Dark Elves do win this fight. So the way that this scenario generator or deployment generator works, it lets you fight a Warmaster battle to conclusion using the regular Warmaster rules, but having some variations on deployment, with things like flank attacks or reserves coming in at different points in the battle. It's just a different way to play the game. How do you feel about this one? What do you think about it? Do you like this general idea? If so, let me know. I'm more than happy to share the rules that I've made up, the adaptations from Volley and Bayonet Road to Glory. More than happy to share those with people who want to take a look just email me and I'll send you a copy and we can play test these things out together. Anyway, I hope you found that a little bit interesting. Thanks for watching and see you again real soon.